Okay, great. So hello, greetings everyone, and welcome to Anthro Perspectives. I'm Keith Kellerson. I'm an applied anthropologist in business and organizational anthropology. Today I have with me Dr. Lisa Galarneau. Did I pronounce that correctly?
That's great. That's a perfect French pronunciation. Thank you.
I tried to put a little accent in there. Uh, and Dr. Lisa Galarneau is an applied anthropologist, but also a futurist. And she's also specializes in human-centered design, and she's a strategist and researcher. So given that was my introduction to you, why don't you tell us a little bit more about yourself and your career?
Sure. Well, I was actually a classically trained anthropologist, so I got my degree at Berkeley in the early 90s. There was a lot of handling skulls, studying monkeys, learning about tribes. But I also got a pretty good education in philosophy and spirituality and religion and social systems and kinship and all of these kinds as well. I actually started my career in the military. I joined when I was 17 as a linguist. I studied Russian at the Defense Language Institute in Monterey, California. The sign in front of our barracks learning Russian so you don't have to. I got out after a little over a year. It was about 15 months with a knee injury, and wasn't really what I wanted to do in the world, but I was already interested in technology. And when I finally got my degree in anthropology, I really didn't know what I was going to do with that point, but it was in 1993, which was the same year the first graphical web browser came out. So I, like so people I knew, became very intrigued with the internet and the possibilities and what we were going to do. So I started in very technical role and spent several years kind of on the back end. I was building some of the original SIRMs. I worked for a systems integrator in Silicon Valley. So I was installing storage arrays and switches and routers and all of the kind of stuff so all these companies could get on the internet. But along the way somewhere, I became very interested in the idea that instead of forcing human beings to adapt to technology, that should do is learn about human behavior and create technology options that are aligned with what people do naturally and technologies that respond to people and their needs in order to make technology use easier for everybody. So I guess you could say that's how I got my start in the mid-90s, very interested in usability and user research. I was very interested in creative and all of the new whiz-bangy tools we now had available at our disposal. I did a lot of work with .coms. I worked for companies like towerrecords.com. In the early 2000s, though, I decided to go back to school. I was very interested in gaming. So I decided to study education and learning in order to figure out how can we merge all of these worlds of technology and gaming and entertainment and the stuff that people do so readily and so naturally in an entertainment context in a way that we would love to see people work or education settings. Just the motivation factor is tremendous. So I spent most of the 2000s doing graduate work. I ended up pursuing a PhD. I did that in New Zealand at the University of Waikato in the Screen and Media Department, but they had a postgraduate games research lab. So I was studying online gamers, international online gamers, and did field work in 13 countries and sort of explored the relationship between physical space and gaming, and also virtual space and gaming, and visited a lot of really cool countries doing amazing stuff. So, China, Japan, South Korea, Thailand, various countries in Europe. And then once I was almost finished, I was offered a position at Microsoft Games User Research, and I went to work there for a few years. And then I pivoted into market research and have since done a whole bunch of different consulting projects, contract projects. I've probably worked for really hundreds of companies and organizations at this point. The years, usually in a shorter term consulting basis. I'm sort of the person they bring in to figure out what's wrong.
Mm,
And that obviously involves a lot of research, but sometimes they're also just looking to understand and exploit a new opportunity space. So just this year, I set up higherwisdom.org. We're a social impact creative think and a network of freelancers and consultants.
mhm,
So we have about 20, 30 people on board now, and that's our primary effort because we're finding that there's been a process of understanding very well the value that academically trained practitioners bring to the table,
mhm,
and sort of a misunderstanding instance in the user experience world
mhm.
that research and strategy are incredibly important. You need to be early in the process, to test early and often, as I like to say. But a lot of that work doesn't end up getting done until much later in the process, which is really a shame because it
Yeah.
means we can't affect the sort of which we otherwise would. So I'm just a big advocate for users, for customers, for constituents, for learners, for whoever we're trying to design, products, services, and experiences for. So I'm always trying to help advocate for that point of view.
I love it. I love it. I mean, such a wide variety of experience you have in so many different environments, military, IT. I did my share of some IT work where I worked with routers as well and lots of
Mm-hmm.
tech support. And it was interesting you were talking about linguistics. I saw your profile that, you studied Slavic languages.
I did.
Yeah. So, it's funny because I've studied Germanic languages. So we've got two-thirds
Ah,
of Europe covered here between the two of us. But,
right.
when COVID first started, there were, there's kind of these jokes going around about, oh, are you making sourdough bread? Or are you trying to learn a new language? Or this
Right.
during your time. And ironically, I started to learn a new language, which I chose Russian. Because the writing system,
Здравствуйте.
yeah, Pozhalajsta. I and I started to teach myself that using just Babel, and I think I wanted to challenge myself because the writing system is different, and I wanted to be able to read it, you know.
Mm-hmm.
And then I started on it, and I was doing really good, and I was watching videos, and then I got this side job, this side offer, independently to translate some old letters from German to English.
Hmm.
These were family letters back from World War II, and it was an immigrant mother who had relocated, of course, to the United States, and she was trying to help her family back in Germany and sending packages back and forth, and there was a lot going on. So I kind of got sidetracked from one language to another. But it's great because when you're an anthropologist, and especially if you're a business or an applied anthropologist, of course, you think about the workplace, you think about organizational structures, and you think about company culture. But then
Mm-hmm.
there's that other side of you that gets back interested in language and religion and spirituality and, ancient cultures and things like that. So, it's really
Things
great.
fundamental to being human. Yeah,
Yes,
all of the
yes,
things that
yes.
are fundamental also to civilization, right?
Yep. Yes, absolutely. And that's the thing. I think too, sometimes we kind of put ourselves in this dichotomy of, we have to kind of take the person or the people or the human out of business. Well, actually, we have to do just the complete opposite, to make
Mm-hmm.
a good functioning company culture. And that's the way, the original human resources movement started, was to try to put human back into business.
Right.
I think we're still many years later still trying to struggle through that and work on that, especially today with diversity and inclusion and equity being huge issues,
Mm-hmm.
and so many other things. But one thing I wanted to ask you is, you describe yourself as a futurist. So
Mm-hmm.
tell me, what do you think is the future of applying anthropology in the workplace?
Well, I'm a little bit known for what I call anthropology of the future. I haven't written a book about it yet, but I probably should, which is really about recognizing that anthropology is about human behavior, norms, values, etc., as they are expressed through culture, both in the past, but also the present and, of course, the future. And I'm a great believer that the best way to predict the future is to invent it.
Mhm.
And what we tend to do too often is to let de facto culture and de facto structures and status quo paradigms languish for far too long beyond their period of efficacy, if they were ever efficacious, right?
Yeah.
Um, and what we really need to do is look at potential and the human dilemma and the paradoxes, right, around being human
Mhm.
from a perspective of, well, how do we make everything better? And the best thing, a way I know to do that is to pick a point in the future. Let's say it's 2030, the UN does this thing, and we have to decide once and for all what it means to be human on our world.
Mhm.
And we also have to think about that in a sustainable way, and that's very much applicable to work and the place. Um, because a lot of people are miserable at work,
Yes.
right?
Yes,
How do
absolutely.
we start fixing the problems of
Right.
work? So we fix the problems of work, in my mind, by making people aren't working too hard, by making sure people aren't wasting time at work. You know, we have a lot of people in miserable 40-hour work weeks who could probably do that with much less time and would be happier doing it that way, who need work balance, who need to be able to work around other things in their life. So I like to approach workplace anthropology pragmatically, I guess you could say.
Mhm.
And what I always want to do is get into those organizations to see, okay, what's actually going on, right? How
Mhm.
much work product is actually being done, how much productivity being lost, how efficient are people, how do they feel about their work, how does it make it feel at the end of the day to go home, how does it make them when they wake up at 6 a.m. knowing they're going to work again. Because I don't want anyone to feel, even on a de facto basis, they're participating in a system of mass slavery, right?
Right. Right.
Even though it's kind of a messed up paradigm, the fact that each and every one of us are responsible for ourselves, and what we have to do to survive in this world is go find work for, right? That's kind of messed up in a way. However, a lot of people gain a lot of benefit from work. They enjoy work. They enjoy the team they work with. So we have to look at both the positive, I think, and I also think we need to start designing work around people who are just really talented, have
Mhm.
the same kinds of interests,
Mhm.
rather than trying to pigeonhole people into job descriptions, which
Mhm.
are often very limiting. And that's often what makes people miserable. They know they have more potential than
Mhm.
the work that they do, and they're looking at agency and they're looking for ways to create impact they can't.
Mhm.
So, yeah, workplaces are interesting. You know, you can tell a lot about a workplace just by showing up and seeing, you know, who's smiling, right? Who's engaging with one
Right.
another.
Right.
You know, who is being allowed to lead, and who is not being allowed to lead, right? So I think the whole key to workplace anthropology in this time right now is to be willing to just see accurately
Yeah.
what's happening and who's being treated fairly and who's not, who's being promoted and who's not, and all of those things. So I guess you could say that's where I stand at the moment.
Yeah. Yeah, that's good. Actually, my master's thesis was on job descriptions, which seems like a strange subject for an applied anthropology degree or applied anthropology thesis. But, you know, the whole point of business and organizational anthropology is that you look at issues within the company culture or business processes with those anthropological eyes, that anthropological lens. And what I
Mm-hmm.
found was interesting with job descriptions, and um, I was kind of surprised because at first I really wasn't passionate about that subject of job descriptions, because how many people really look at their job descriptions? You know, when was the last time,
Mm-hmm.
you know, you could ask people, when was the last time you looked at it? And that was actually one of my questions when I did my research. But for those that did look at it, they were very passionate about what their job description said. And
Mm.
you know, it came into this anthropological theory or sociological theory of social identity. and social identity within an organization. And that job description defines who you are and where you stand within the organization. However,
Right, and how everyone perceives you,
and
right?
how everyone perceives you and what's your social capital within the organization, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But what was really interesting was the idea that the person who the job description is for has a say in what that job description says, right?
Mm-hmm.
So the, sort of what you want to call the best practice or the standard operating procedure is that, the person sits down with their boss and they go over their job description and say, well, maybe once a year, I don't do this anymore, but I do this, and this should be added, and this should be taken away.
Mm-hmm.
So what you're saying is true, is really the jobs should be built around the person, not trying to pigeonhole someone into the job, right? And I think too, unless a company is doing this hardcore skill gap analysis and they're presenting all these numbers and to upper management about the gaps in their skills and all this kind of thing, really the job description is very flexible. It's very fluid. And
yeah, I've written a couple of my own job descriptions, and it was because I was brought into a role not around a job description, but around a goal. So the goal, for instance, being website conversion. We're only getting a 2% conversion rate on our website. How do we fix it? So I would get offered something like that, and then it was a matter of me sitting down and writing the job description myself.
Right.
It isn't super common, but it makes a lot of sense if you think about it, because a lot of organizations don't know what jobs they really need, and they limit people in some ways, and we end up with these cultures, instead of just pitch in, can do, it's, well, that's not in my job description.
Right.
Well, whose job description in?
Right.
Right.
Right. And that's the thing, and that was kind of the title of my thesis too, was, there was always this other duties as assigned. Well, it became, I made a play on that, and I said other identities as assumed, right? Because even in our jobs, we always end up working kind of outside of our job description and taking on roles where there's a need, whether we realize we're doing that or not. So, I think too, that's kind of where we're going with, and I think companies just have to realize that, it's not a matter of getting someone to fit that job description or to fit that job posting. It is getting someone that can, bring value or bring talents and skills to the organization that can do this job as, maybe 80% or whatever it is, and bring more to the job, right?
And as they rise to the challenge and impress you, you should compensate them further. You should advance them. You should promote them and give them better job descriptions and titles.
Right.
Which, fortunately, what doesn't happen. A lot of people pitch in and try to add value, and you have these very good people who want a stellar job, and the inclination is to keep people who are doing a great job in that job, right? Because they're doing a great job and they know the job.
You want to maintain motivation and engagement and retention, right? So, that job description has got to be where they're at, and it's got to fit them and fit their identity to keep them on that path.
Right. Right. And then it needs to expand as they expand their capability.
Yeah. Did you freeze? Are you still there? Oh, okay. I thought.
No, I'm still here.
Good.
Yeah, no, I'm here.
So, we kind of talked about this with the job description work, but can you tell us about some more insights into organizational behavior or organizational culture that you've gained in your career that might be helpful to others?
Well, I'm looking over my entire career, and what I will tell you is that I am constantly struck by how much waste there is in the system in terms of human potential. So as a technologist, going back several decades at this point, I was thinking about how do we create better technology to make people more effective and to scale their experience in a way that's productive and efficient and easy to learn. And I feel like the technology industry, for example, isn't hyper concerned on about people's productivity, about their efficiency, about their happiness, when it comes to the tools available to use. And what I see right now is an accumulation of stress and fatigue and crisis management that's affecting a lot of people's mental health. And this isn't anything new, but it's been exacerbated by this pandemic.
Yeah.
So I guess the major insight, I've come away watching people work for all this time is just deeply unhappy a lot of people are
Mhm.
about their work in ways that they don't need to be. And I think we can address the issue of management training. I think we can address the issue of positive reinforcement, right? We live in
Mhm.
a culture that's so negatively reinforcing without being positively reinforcing.
Mhm.
Um, I think we can address the issues of violence and the fact that we're expected to show up to work in our professional persona where nobody knows anything. They certainly don't know, you know, if someone broke our heart yesterday and we can hardly function,
Right.
right? Who cares about that or is supposed to care?
Mhm.
So we still have this kind of factory model and this factory mindset
Right.
that treats people, I think, as automatons
Mhm.
um, instead of
Taylorism.
treating them like human beings. Right. Well, they just want to show up and quit.
Yeah.
And that doesn't work all that well with knowledge work in particular. Knowledge workers need to be intrinsically motivated to do what they do. Now, some extrinsic motivation is good as well.
Mhm.
A nice salary, a nice place to work. Can I bring my dog to work? If I can bring my dog to work, I will keep working for you forever as long as you're nice to me because I can
Mhm.
bring my dog to work,
Mhm.
right? So
Right.
it's these tiny things that matter a lot to people.
Mhm.
I could do anything about the state workplace. I would introduce more positivity, more compassion, more love for our fellow employees, more flexibility that people can work from home. The thing I love about pandemic, I call it pandemic silver linings, is that traffic way down in all of these places. And traffic makes people crazy because it's just stupid,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And now we have a paradigm where people are working from home and traffic's way down and errands down. So how do we look at that entire landscape for status quo expectations about work and rethink work within the context of what's desirable but also what's possible?
Mhm.
And I can just see a lot of people, they might commute an hour or more to work. Here in the Seattle, the big tech companies have buses and they bus people to campus all over
Yeah.
local area. Um, and they have Wi-Fi on the bus and they do their thing and they get to work and they stand in front of a computer, they put on their headset and they hardly talk to anybody all day. Right? So why are we forcing people into office settings if they're not really going to talk to people?
Right. Right.
Um,
Right.
it just doesn't make any sense. And commuting is something people don't get paid for.
Mhm.
So why do we force people to spend time working or getting to work when that's time they're not going to be sated for?
Yeah.
So the whole model, I think, just needs to be looked at again from not a top down perspective, but also from a bottom up perspective.
Yeah.
Because I feel like we could be effective, if not more effective than we currently are, if we reorganize some systems in fundamental ways,
Mhm.
start focusing more on what motivates people in work
Yeah.
and how do we make sure that everyone is motivated with respect to their work, that makes sense for them.
Yeah. It's funny. It's almost like we maybe as a culture, we kind of assume that going to work is not supposed to be a pleasant experience. Like,
Right, it's work.
right, it's work. You're supposed to work. It's supposed to be
Yeah.
hard, and
Mm-hmm.
you're supposed to be miserable to some degree.
Everyone
And
is. Life
yeah,
isn't
exactly.
fair,
That's the way it is. That's the way it is. Sort of thing. And I think it's interesting when I read so many studies. You're finding companies are finding that no, the happier you make employees, the more productivity you're going to have, and the better retention you're going to have, and so many positives to this. But I think it's still, we're kind of fighting our own culture, in a way. Sometimes people talk about other cultures and other countries changing their culture, and you're dealing with 4,000 to 6,000 years of development. Well, we're kind of doing that too. I mean, maybe not 4 to 6,000 as far as the United States is concerned, but we're still kind of fighting ourselves on this whole concept that work can be pleasant. It can be a rewarding experience. And really, if you're one of the kind of people that feel like, your purpose in life is to make the world a better place, hey, the workplace is a great place to start, because there's a lot of, things there that you can address and research and do something about.
Yeah, we come together in amazing ways at work, and yeah, it's neat how many people are with people that they don't like. Yeah. And, they often don't like those people because they aren't treated very well.
Right.
And I think the pyramid scheme, if you want to call it that we call standard business culture,
yeah.
I mean, those are authoritarian organizations, right? Starts at the top, whatever the top says, it trickles down through the organization. Whatever you're told from the top, that's what we do. That's our mission. And I think there are some very healthy changes happening, though, with organizations that are more social innovation focused, that want to make sure they're igniting the right kinds of passion in their employees for a collective mission. Because when we serve a collective mission, the things we can do, we've been to the moon, normal people don't get together and go to the moon. We need workplace infrastructure to make that happen. But we also just need to be conscious about how we're utilizing human potential organizations and challenge these stereotypes about work and what it's supposed to be like. Because to me, the world is not about work or play. Sometimes we play at work, sometimes when we play, right? And that's about getting in your flow and participating and all hands on deck, and I know what my job is and I'm going to do it. And I do my job extremely well, and my teammates, oh my gosh, they value me.
Yeah.
Right? That's a hugely important part of Maslow's hierarchy of needs.
Right.
And if people don't get those belonging and value needs met, we end up with an epidemic of mass depression, which is, of course, what we're dealing with in the world.
That's right.
Yeah. But the first step towards curing anything is awareness.
Yeah.
And being willing to take, a hard look at what's happening.
Yeah,
I'm sorry if that's not a sunny perspective on the workplace. Sometimes we need a perspective shift.
I think, the thing is that part of the reason we have people in the workplace is to solve problems, right? Mm-hmm. So in a very sort of looking at the unacknowledged obvious reason of why people are hired, they're hired to solve problems. So I think, too, one thing that anthropologists can offer is this skill set we have to be able to go into an ambiguous situation, acknowledge the obvious, and do problem solving and help, the culture adjust to make things better than what they were before, right?
Yeah, unpacking complexity, for instance.
Yes.
But also getting people to talk to us.
Right.
Anthropologists are very good at getting people to talk to us. And when we're part of a formal project, for instance, to get a hood in an organization, there's really no one who can do it. Anthropologists do it. We're always thinking about culture and interdependency and kinship between people in a workplace. And we think about conflict, and we think about conflict resolution, and we think about, which people in this tribe, if you want to call it, right? Mm-hmm. Are there some troublemakers we need to deal with, maybe, who are causing the majority of the problems? That's often the case. Yeah, and so those are the kinds of things we discover.
And are they really troublemakers, or are they trying to make things better? I'm sorry.
That's such a good point because sometimes
Hmm.
I've been a troublemaker myself. Good trouble, we call it.
Mhm.
Um,
Right.
because sometimes you've got good trouble going on, but
Yes.
sometimes you've got trouble going on that's just people who are there to make their money, and they're there to make their money as quickly as they can,
Right.
and making their money and getting themselves home is really their highest priority. And what I would say is that people like that should probably be moved into some sort of job or role that's more satisfying to them, so
Yeah.
we just have to be honest with ourselves sometimes, I think, while we unpack culture.
Yeah. So the next question I have, and this is a question that I think has a little, some debate on LinkedIn, I've noticed. And I think it just comes from a basic misunderstanding of what the concept of culture is, actually. But I wanted to ask you, what is your definition of organizational culture?
Culture in general, and you could call us, humanity and organization because we're organized in some ways, is a set of norms,
Mhm.
values, behaviors, actions, proclivities, um, rituals.
Yeah, absolutely.
um, it's the tie that bind us, right? You can have culture to have more than one person, right?
Right.
Because even families are cultures,
Right.
right? Your relationship with your spouse is a culture. Your relationship with your best friend is another culture. So organizations have culture in much the same way. And because we're self-organized beings, we tend to self-organize culture,
Yeah.
and we tend to reflect culture in different ways. Um, Organizations are much the same. Now, culture does start on the top. I definitely believe that good leaders set an appropriate tone and culture for
Yes.
their organizations, and
Yes.
that's really important.
Hmm.
But employees within the organization decide whether to embrace, that culture or that ethos, and that's as well. And that's when you get the sort of bottom grassroots style culture development, which is all that happens is that people hack culture and change culture times while simultaneously supporting it. They try to iterate and make it better. That often happens in organizations as a bottom-up phenomenon. And I would say that all of this diversity and inclusion work that people are wanting now, because this worldwide movement has been sparked, is sort of a bottom-up
Yes.
organizational phenomenon that now leaders are being asked to embrace, so it becomes a top-down phenomenon as well.
Hmm.
And once it becomes top-down, then you have all sorts of organizations sharing that, and now we have all sorts of organizations doing the right thing, but it has to be approached from both directions, I would say.
Hmm. Hmm. And what do you think organizational culture is not? What do you think are some of the misconceptions about organizational culture and culture in general?
Well, there are companies who talk about their company culture and how great it is. And I'm not going to name names, but I had an opportunity to do a bit of work with a company that likes to tell everyone in the world, and then the press and media tend to talk about it, about what a great culture they have.
Uh-huh.
Now, I visited this particular organization and I found out that their culture is actually misogynistic, and there are a lot of things about it that are really not great. They continue to tell the world how great their culture is. I was just hearing it last week, and a couple of the leaders of this company, we're still talking about how these great leaders, because they create a reflection of culture that's not actually true about organization. You have to be careful about that because culture is not really something you can talk about how great your culture is.
Uh-huh.
Culture is something that we observe as people live out their daily lives and work or go about their business. It's an emergent phenomenon. Culture is. So you can say all you want all day long about how great your culture is, or even how bad your culture is, right? But it actually has to be observed in order for anyone to really know the truth,
Right.
right? It's not just what you say.
Yeah. what do you think are some of the top skills that anthropologists can bring to any company?
Well, we are very curious people, first of all. I mean, I often say anthropologists are born, not made,
Uh-huh.
because we're the kids, right, who are out trying to talk to all the other kids. We're very interested in kids from other countries, we're interested in travel, we're very interested in language. Because people are our thing, we are people, right? And we
Yes.
observe people and we interact with people, it becomes our major skill set. Is that we're very good with people, but it's not just about some sort of cognitive point of view or frame of mind. It's about an actual kindness and compassion. The anthropologists I run into in the world tend to be the nicest people I've ever met in professional settings. And I think that makes a big difference when you need people who advocate for your employee, advocate for your users or your constituents or citizens or learners or
Mhm.
whoever it is that you're trying to serve or that you design products for or you design experiences for or whatever your responsibility in the world is. Everyone is in the people business, right?
Right.
Who's not in
That's
the
right.
people business?
That's right.
Yeah,
You can't
yeah.
have a company
So
without people, you know. Whenever everyone says,
everyone.
"Oh, the company this or the company that," it's like you're talking about people. Actually, you realize that, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we're a little too fascinated still with widgets and numbers and sales figures
Mhm.
and not fascinated enough with the people
Right.
who populate our organizations. And how do we activate all those people who work for us to do the best possible job and to be doing the right thing all the time,
Mhm.
or as much as possible, rather than, okay, this is what we're doing. Okay, let's now figure it all out. No, now we're doing something else. Well, we did a bunch of work. Oh, well, it's wasted. We have to do something else now because some stakeholder in the organization who they talked to before now comes along in an authoritarian way and says, no, it needs to be this way now.
Right. Right.
And, that's very demoralizing and it's not organized and it's not very efficient.
Mhm.
So I think that the future of organizations is going to include a lot of studying organizations and
Yes.
figuring out what formula really works, because they're magic formulas and there are secret sauces that make organizations sing.
Mhm.
But we need to do more work to discover what those patterns are so that we can then pass them on to others. I refer to this as ethnographies of progress. I want to make this happen at some point, where we go and we study really great organizations and we produce a detailed ethnography of what their organizational structure is, who works there, what they're like, what they do, how things are going. And then we can pass those on to other organizations, can use that same model or framework for their organization, knowing that it's been, tested in the field.
Mhm.
So I
Mhm.
think there's a lot of work we can do in that area. Um, it all falls in the realm of challenge all assumptions, which I know that you feel strongly about too.
Yes. Yes. Um, so the next question I have, and I was going to say something, but I think I'm going to wait until we get to the next question here. What do hiring managers and recruiters need to know to understand the value of the anthropological skill set? The reason I'm asking this question is I think, as anthropologists, we have a great amount of skill sets that address a lot of problems that you can kind of see spelled out in job descriptions and job postings. But I think hiring managers and recruiters may not be able to understand the translation of what you're asking for is some anthropological skill, right?
Mm-hmm.
You see. So I was just wondering what your feeling is about that, and what skills do you think hiring managers and recruiters need to know about when hiring someone with an anthropology background?
Yeah, I mean, it depends a little bit on what the job is, but fundamentally, we're social scientists,
Yeah.
right? So we're scientists who study people. So if you're in the business of people, right,
Right.
why wouldn't you hire scientists? Like, just have them on your all the time, right? They can help you with organizational issues. They can help you illuminate new marketplaces if you're trying to improve your sales and marketing strategy. What do? You go figure out people, and you figure out what people want to buy, and you figure out how to get people to buy your stuff, right? Which again is about studying people, right? If you have organizational problems, or for instance, you are now trying to pivot to a distributed model because everybody has to work from home, what do? You hire social scientists, right? And some of the people who are part of Higher Wisdom, we have psychologists, social psychologists, and different types of people who are also social scientists, but not specifically anthropologists, who do this kind of work, organizational development work, for instance. Now, most people, though, get in the mindset, like in the tech industry, for instance, they will say things like, well, everything other than sales and engineering is just overhead, and you shouldn't make any investments there, right? The guy with the napkin who's now in charge of the organization has his great idea on a napkin, and now everybody should go build his great idea. And we will sit in zillions of meetings while we try to figure out the great idea, which he hasn't taken beyond a simple concept that now needs to be deconstructed, because we can't build your great idea without understanding the details. And in the meantime, why don't we go see if your great idea is actually something that's well received, right? Because what happens is the great idea on the napkin gets built, and then we hire sales and marketing people, and they will now go sell our great idea. And about 80% of the time, companies falter in this stage because finding a market for something that you've built is much more difficult than finding a market and building stuff they want and need. Right? So that's the real value proposition, I would say, for bringing strategy and research in early in your process, because I will look at your idea on a napkin and I will think through all of the different variables, and we'll design a simple study to test the feasibility of your idea. And then you have more information, and you know how to move forward, and you can feel more confident about what you're doing. So those are just a few examples, I guess. There are a lot of them. But that's just a few. You know, people do think about anthropologists, I think, a bit in a historical sense, and maybe they think we're not relevant. But those of us who have been working in the tech industry for a really long time, you know, technology is material culture, and that's something that anthropologists are also very fluent in. And we think a lot about, we think about tool use. And I think it was Marshall McLuhan who said, we shape our tools, and then our tools shape us. So there is this, you know, phenomenon as well of needing to take a look at technology out in the field and seeing how it's now affecting culture. And some of that is very good. You know, I got very excited when people were hunting Pokemon with their phones, you know, and how that sort of took off, because I said to myself, oh gosh, if we can get people hunting Pokemon phones, we can do anything. You know, we can get people picking up garbage for points. You know, sorts of things, and, you know, finding problems that need to be documented, and all the things that people can now do, which, you know, it's glorious. It's glorious to have a civilization of people where a ton of people now have access to all the world's recorded knowledge in the palm of their hand. I mean, it's extraordinary. But how does that change us? And it changes us in positive ways, but it also changes us in negative ways, because we're also not now connecting enough on just a normal human level. And people are bored, they're disaffected, and they're not spending time without the phones, creating and building and you know, cooking together and doing all the sorts of stuff we used to do before we had this great tech, because everybody just wants to zone out on their phones and binge watch the greatest stuff, which is awesome. I mean, I love a good binge watch myself, but somehow we have to figure out how to balance all of this.
Yeah, you know, one of the things that I always think about is just the ability to problem solve. You know, for example, your example of the guy with the idea on the napkin. You know, there's one that, you know, if the company insists that we're going to build this idea, and as an anthropologist, what you can do is, you know, get people together and figure out what problems have to be solved to be able to get this widget built, whatever it might be.
Mm-hmm.
But there's something else we can do too. We can also kind of go back to the person and say, do you have user experience data? Do you have consumer research data? Do you have marketing data? Because, and I do this too, where I have this greatest idea in the whole world about something, and it's the best thing that anyone's ever thought of.
Mm-hmm.
But if people don't want it and they don't want to buy it and they're not interested in it, then it's not that great of an idea, right?
Not in our money-centered paradigm,
right,
anyway,
exactly.
right? If the world's still going to prioritize everything needs to run on money,
right.
I would love a world where we just get to do the right thing all day long and we don't care about money. But that's not where we are.
That's not where we are. And
things need to be viable.
right. We have to work within, the confines of where we're at in our human development.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I mean, and then trying to get salespeople and coming down on salespeople to sell this thing, and market this thing. And, I can remember a story another anthropologist told me once where he was talking to a consumer researcher from Japan. And this particular individual worked for the cosmetic industry, which was very prominent in the area of Japan where he was from. And they were having this conversation and they were talking about, what is the best way to approach consumer research? And he was saying, well, he said, if I go and do a study on lipstick, for example, I'm going to ask women these following questions. And the other guy says, don't even do that. Just ask them what they want, period. And it was like, well, about lipstick or what? No, nothing. Just ask them what they want. Because then they'll tell you, well, they may not even mention lipstick, right? They may mention eyeshadow, or they may mention something else that they like. I like this, but this and this is, is very difficult for me, or something to that effect.
That's a good point. We do go broader because we care about context, anthropologists do, and holistic thinking. And also, to your point, often what we're trying to do is to uncover latent needs, right? It's not the specificity of, look, I have thought of a set of great new lipstick colors. I am totally in love with our new lip colors. We have 6 of them. What do you think? And people will, of course, they'll like some, they won't like some, right? You might come up with a hit lipstick color, maybe not. But if you're a big cosmetics company, the conversation should be about, what are you trying to accomplish in life? How much time each day do you want to spend applying makeup? All of these surrounding and peripheral questions, because consumers will often just make the choices you offer them.
Correct.
But when you have larger conversations with them, that's when the interesting stuff comes out. So the classic anthropology example we hear about a lot is Procter and Gamble back in the 90s, I think it was, decided they wanted to invent some new products. So they sent some ethnographers out in the field to go study women mainly. Doing their housekeeping, cooking, et cetera. What they found is that woman wanted to clean up after dinner, and she would do the dishes. Now, of course, this isn't only women, but it was a lot of women doing it. Would do the dishes, and then she would want to clean the floors in the kitchen. But there was this resistance to not wanting to pull the mop bucket out, not wanting to deal with the whole thing with mopping. So they talked to these people about this, and they would all say, well, we want clean floors, but we don't want to deal with the mop bucket after dinner, and then the floor's wet for a long time, and et cetera, et cetera. That's how they invented the Swiffer. And the Swiffer has now been one of their most successful products ever, right? A lot of people use it for cat hair, but they also now have the sheets that are like for mopping, and they now have the products for like dusting, and it's a huge product line. All because they wanted to come up with a simple and easy way for women to sweep and mop the floors after dinner, or people who sweep and mop the floors. And they studied mainly women, what happened, and came up with this amazingly successful product line. So that's how product design needs to be. It's great to have an idea on a napkin, but why not think beyond the specific thing you as one person have come up with and thought through, because you need diverse and divergent points of view on ideas as well, so you can really think them through and make them better or throw them away if not viable. right?
Right. Right. Absolutely. And whatever every great idea, you've got to put your idea out there for criticism, right? You've got to
Mm-hmm.
have people come out there and say, this is the stupidest idea I've ever heard.
Yeah.
Because that's part of the research, right? That's part of
Mm-hmm.
like preliminary getting an idea of what the resistance might be when you take it out into the field for research.
And hope
So,
your ego isn't too attached to the idea,
right,
because you
right.
need to be able to let it morph
Yes.
if it needs to. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
And sometimes people get very set on the one color they want associated with their idea. It's just because it's their favorite color and that's how they want it to be.
Mhm.
And that's not really the way it's
Yeah.
supposed to work.
Yeah. I grew up not too far from Detroit. And of course, in that area, the automobile industry is huge.
Mm-hmm.
And you can just do a study just on the different cars that Ford, GM, Chrysler have put out, even Toyota have put out, that they thought was the greatest, best idea they've ever had. And then nobody bought it and it had problems. And then there was recalls. And then,
I know this
it was
does
rolling
happen
over on
over
the
and
road.
over.
And,
And
so,
now we live in a world where the cars all look the same and
yeah,
there's a standard set of colors they like to use. I'm the kind of person, I want a really cool, iridescent, metallic purple car.
yeah,
Care about car colors,
yeah,
right? That's the first thing I notice. I also notice the shape of cars.
yeah.
And they try to make them all like this aerodynamic shape, and they're all just boring. And then you want to charge me $80 for your boring car? I just don't get it. Although I like cars very much. Cars are very cool. But yeah, there's a lot of rating on old designs. I love the history of cars and I've visited old car museums, and there are some amazing profiles for cars that people just fell in love with them,
Yes.
the
Yep.
Model A or whatever. And I'm always wondering, why don't we live in a world full of great car designs from history that we've
Right.
now redone? They did it with the VW Beetle and it was very successful. Then
Mhm,
they did it with the PT Cruiser and that was super successful, right?
mhm, mhm,
But still we keep going back to the same models, which they think, of course, have broader appeal. They
mhm.
think those more creative takes on cars are too niche and people aren't going to like them or whatever.
Mhm, mhm.
And so now all the cars have to all be white and red, and maybe you get navy blue and maybe you get green and maybe there's a nicer blue, but that's probably all you're going to
Yeah, yeah. It goes back to, Henry Ford, Model T. You can have any color you want as long as it's black.
get. That's right. That
That's
is where
pretty.
it started, right? Yeah, and Henry Ford wasn't a very nice man apparently, but the innovations, with the assembly line and everything, did make a big difference, and
They
that's how
did.
they managed to crank out
Yep.
many of those back in like 1908. And people, bought them like hotcakes, but they also bought them before there was really infrastructure for them, before they were safe. Do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah,
Like, because this is
absolutely.
what we
Right.
do. Who didn't
Right.
want,
Right.
what did they call it? A horseless carriage. Who didn't want a horseless carriage? Everybody
Right.
did. Yeah.
Right.
But there was a big period of experimentation because in some ways we pushed that technology out way too soon.
Yeah.
And then we needed to focus on public transit and train systems and better modes of mass transportation, but there was this hyper focus on cars.
Mhm,
And what happened back in the 20s in LA is that they actually had a mass transit system that was amazing, similar to the subway system in New York or something.
mhm,
And General Motors decided that no, we need to push cars and we need to push freeways and we need to push suburbs and we're going to push drive-throughs and drive-ins and
mhm.
we're going to have car culture and that's what we're going to do. And now we've ended up in a world where a lot of people live in their cars.
Yeah.
People who work live in their cars,
Yeah.
and hate it. People don't like living in their cars,
Right.
or spending too much time in their cars for the
Yeah.
most part.
Yeah.
So, yeah, that's a technology that kind of got away from us. And, well, I think we will continue to have cars, and that's fine. Um, we still need to keep looking at better systems of, mass transportation
I
and ways
agree.
of getting around. And
100%.
now with planes don't make any sense. We need high-speed trains all over the place, and that's how people need to get around. That's just what we need to do.
That's one of my favorite things about going to Germany is because, the trains,
The
how
trains
efficient
in
they
Europe,
are,
they
how
are
smooth
so
they
good.
are, and how you can just go anywhere, anytime. And you go to the train station and it's like a mini shopping mall, or it is a shopping mall.
Oh, the train stations are fun, and
They're
some of them are
fantastic.
old and beautiful.
Yeah,
And
love
yeah,
it.
I've traveled extensively by train in Europe, and I love it too. Because you can legitimately go somewhere for a weekend, and it's no big thing. And the train station is usually very central downtown to get to, and yeah, it's a wonderful system. And ours, unfortunately, here in the U.S., doesn't even compare at all. But that's because we made some decisions, or some decisions were made for us
Yep.
about what our priorities are.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I tell you what, we've almost been almost an hour. Can you
Yeah.
believe it? Time flies when you're having fun. I just want to open it up to you if there's anything else you want to add today. But this has been a great talk, and I really enjoyed talking to you very much.
Yeah, me too. I would just say that a lot of things are in flux right now,
Absolutely.
and it's an opportunity for creative disruption that's positive. And I think as much as possible, anything we can do to reflect on the state of humanity in this time is going to be really important.
Yep.
And it's a time for us to sort of speak up about things that aren't working, and it's a time for us to change things that aren't working.
Yep.
So if I could encourage your audience in any way, I would say we should all consider being good trouble in the world.
Yeah.
Because sometimes it's just about stating the obvious about things that we don't tend to really consider because it's our de facto reality, and this is just the way we operate. But let's think about what's working, what's not working, what can we make better, how can we make the world a better place based on now learned. We've got vaccines coming, life will back to normal, but
Yeah.
what does that
What does that even look
new
like anymore?
normal look like, right? Because I think it looks different.
Yeah.
And I think we need to save the things we love, and we need to get rid of the things we all hate. And that's we sort of shepherd our passage into the future. And we just need to keep doing that, and iterating and dreaming and inventing, and coming up with ways to make the world better for people and also for the planet and everything else. So I think there are bright days ahead for sure. I'd like to say that.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I don't, with everything that's been going on this year, I don't see how we can get any worse. We probably can, but
There's
but
no
I
way.
think
There's no
we're on a
way.
better road. Yeah.
There's no way but up at this
That's
point.
right.
Yeah,
That's right.
that's what we all have to remember.
Yeah.
Well, Keith, thank you so much. It was a
Thank
great
you.
conversation. I appreciate you having me.
Absolutely. I love talking to you today. It was great. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye now.
Enjoy the rest of your day.
You too.